Welcome to Don't Tell Me About Yourself, the podcast where old school hiring meets a modern reality check.
I'm Lorna Erickson.
And I'm Victoria Gates, and we're the co-founders of Expert Interviewers.
Between the two of us, we've got 40 years of hiring experience. We've studied interviewing techniques. We've trained thousands of people globally to stop making the same mistakes over and over again.
And we've got 340,000 people following us online because apparently everyone has a story about a bad interview. You know the ones. The illegal questions, the 45-minute monologues, showing up late with no apology.
So every week, we're tackling the biggest subjects in hiring.
We bring real stories, real data, and real talk about how to make interviews actually work for everyone.
Because great hiring isn't luck, it's a practice skill. So whether you hire, apply, or just love a good interview train wreck, the show is for you.
And this week, we're tackling the subject of AI.
AI isn't fixing hiring, it's just speeding it up.
So if your interview process is broken, AI will help you break it faster.
Yep. Companies are using it, candidates are using it, and somehow everyone's surprised when it goes sideways or weird.
Right. And today we're going to just talk about AI in the hiring process specifically, what it's amplifying, what it's exposing, and why companies just don't get to blame the tool.
That's right. Let's do this. So before we split this up into candidates and companies, we need to say this clearly. AI isn't good or bad. It's just revealing.
Yeah. And if you had a strong hiring process before, AI, like clear roles, structured interviews, trained interviewers, AI will probably help you.
And if your process was chaotic, biased, or just plain lazy, AI is going to speed that up. So let's talk about how people are actually using AI on both sides and where it goes sideways.
Well, let's start with the candidates because that's where the panic always goes first, right? There's a lot of that chatter that we see in terms of like catching candidates, right? So let's talk about this.
Well, I think companies are very used to using AI, which we'll get into more in a second. But when candidates use AI, sometimes companies are calling foul. They're like, is that allowed? Is that cheating that they're using? And I'm like, pot calling the kettle. And I do think that, well, first, I have to say no. It is not cheating for candidates to use AI. It is 100% leveling the playing field, and they should totally be using it. But there's a way to use it where it's helpful, and then there's a way to use it when it's actually going to harm them. So let's talk first about where candidates get it wrong when they're using AI.
The life of the M dash in ChatGPT, right? When you're submitting something, a resume, a cover letter, emails that are clearly written by AI and not edited by you, you haven't looked them over, you just copy paste. I think that's a big one where you can get it wrong and you're not using those tools in the way that you should be, right? So you should be looking it over and editing and making sure that it does sound like you. It might have some thoughts or some ideas from AI. I think that's great, but it should be in your voice.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems that I've seen some recruiters say is that they'll still see the prompts from ChatGPT in the cover letter or the resume.
Yeah, it's rough for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
It's you have to edit that stuff. You have to put it in your voice, as you said, and it needs to have your experiences and your voice in it. Otherwise, you're going to sound like every other candidate who also didn't edit it for their voice.
Exactly. If you want to stand out, right? If you want it to be helpful for you, it needs to be, you need to have that editing step in there. Otherwise, you're not wrong. You're just going to sound like every other candidate out there. And there's a lot of noise. You know, we hear from the recruiting community and a lot of our partners who are recruiters in our space, like our counterparts, like they're inundated. You know, they might get hundreds of resumes. So as a candidate, you know, in order to use AI to make you more efficient, but also still stand out, you do need to take those steps that we mentioned for sure.
Yeah. I know that for the actual interview process itself, like you still have to use your words to explain your own resume and your own experiences. So if AI is, I guess, translating your experience to a point where you can't even describe it anymore,
it's unrecognizable.
Exactly. Yeah. You're doing yourself a disservice because who's sitting in front of them and what's on the resume are two different things. And let's say very worst case, you get the job. And you don't know what you're doing in there, or they think you have the experience even though you don't. And so I guess just back to the editing component, you have to edit it and make it in your own voice and your own experiences.
Don't catfish the company because you're going to have to come in. It's No
Exactly. Yep.
catfishing. Yeah, for
Yes.
sure. The
Yeah.
last place I see, and one of our friends, Mike, does a really good job playing around with the live AI, like using a live AI interviewer to either speak for you or to feed you information. This is something that companies are very much on the lookout for. So as candidates, I think this can be harmful to you when you do
Sure.
this. Again, I think it has good intentions. I think you feel good. It's a little bit of a safety net, but at the end of the day, I think it's hurting you more than it's helping you.
One of our buddies, Mike, the realist recruiter, is so good at showing how this works. But I do think for most candidates, would be more distracting than helpful. And same for the companies that are trying to listen to you after a very long, awkward pause for your computer AI agent to catch up to the question. And in the end, if you get that job, you're not going to like it because it may not be perfectly aligned to your skill sets and motivators.
Yeah. So I feel
Yeah.
like kind of what we're saying is there's a lot of good places to use it, maybe during the interview and preparation and some communications. But when you're live and in the interview itself,
Mhm.
that should really be you as a candidate. Like you shouldn't be relying on AI. Is that what we're saying?
That's what we're saying.
Okay.
You're a human at work, and so you should be a human in the interview.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because, when you get in there, you're not going to have an AI worker that's doing your stuff next to you, right? Like
Right.
you're going to have to be you. So thinking about that, like you don't want to catfish, as we said, but you also you want to be set up for success where you're able to perform in this job.
And I know we started with candidates, even though it's not really a candidate problem. We came up with a couple simple solutions, but I think that companies are looking for a really quick fix when it comes to AI. And there are a lot of partner companies that are saying that AI can fix everything. And so,
So many. I feel like snake
yeah,
oil salesmen are out there everywhere, and there are some really amazing AI products that can be really helpful. We have
yes,
a few favorites that I'm sure we'll share at some point, but it is definitely like, here, this can fix everything. And it's like, at the
right.
end of the day, the companies are out here sort of I feel like we're blaming candidates for misusing it when they're just as guilty.
Exactly. I want to talk now about the company's use of AI and where it breaks trust with candidates.
Companies. So they love AI because it promises them speed. That's like the number one thing it can help with, right?
Right. Yeah, but the speed without the judgment or the oversight is where
Mhm.
things really fall apart. So some common company AI missteps, it starts at the very get-go where AI written job descriptions with just the plain old buzzwords or essentially corporate fluff. So it makes it hard for candidates to know what are they actually applying for.
Yeah. Well, and tying back to what we said to candidates about their resume or their experiences, it needs to sound like you. And if you
Right.
need to stand out, and as a company, it is an employer's job market right now, but your company's brand is out there. And this is something that is really important and critical that you're editing, you're reflecting, you can use AI to help you with some of these things. I think it's great, but it shouldn't be straight from AI description to posting, right? There should be that oversight and judgment, like you said earlier.
Absolutely. The consulting mindset here shouldn't be just consulting with AI. It's consulting with your business partners who have an invested interest in this candidate working out. And so instead of relying 100% on AI on this, you're going to your partners and saying, hey, do we all define our right answers in the same way? If not, let's work through this now. Once you get all that information, sure, pop it into ChatGPT and have it say it in a more fluid way. That's fine. But if you don't do that internally first, then that's a huge misstep that's just look generic out there.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
So one of the next missteps that companies do is they send rejections to candidates with no specific information as to why. And when candidates apply for jobs and they get a rejection from a company at 2 a.m. in the morning with a generic message that you are not a fit, they know that a human is not looking through that. They know that a human didn't even get a chance to review their information and instead they're being rejected by AI. And the reason why this can break trust is that candidates, one, don't feel like they're being properly evaluated. But two, I'm wondering how many companies are actually reviewing and testing some of those rejected candidates to see if their AI is doing it right.
I think this is just a general issue, AI or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think time of day, I could see what you're saying there with some of that.
Yeah.
I also think when you get it too fast, I think some of the AI systems, it's like you submit an application, and I've heard from people in our comments and DMs that, when you get a rejection, like within minutes, it's like, a human didn't, right?
Right.
So it's not just about the time of day or what the quality of the message is,
Yes.
but also the time in between, right?
Yep.
It's very obvious. And I'm not
Yep.
saying that you should just then extend the time, but you should really evaluate your process with how you're rejecting candidates. And I'm
Okay.
I'm wondering how much you're missing from just you relying solely on that AI tool to do the
Totally.
rejecting.
I always talk about how scary it is to impulsively reject a candidate that was potentially great for your company. You can never measure the loss of that because that candidate is gone, working for your competitor, different part of the planet. So instead, I think that companies have to be very careful about setting up these perimeters and making sure that they are rejecting the candidates that they need to be rejecting. I think the process reality is pretty important.
Yeah.
If humans can explain why, okay, we can start there. I'll do
Okay, go
that
ahead.
one.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of go down there. Okay. Okay. So if a human can't explain why someone was rejected, then that rejection should not have happened in the first place.
Well, hold on. At what point of the process though? Because like a
Yeah.
human's not going to reject. Like I don't think a human could reject at 400 applications.
I'm saying personalized rejections isn't likely for a job that gets 400 to 4,000
Yeah.
applicants. But to spot check that and look through and be like, oh, I can see verbally say, I can see why this candidate was rejected because they did not meet X, Y, and Z
Sure.
versus that was a candidate we wanted to see and we accidentally sent them a rejection.
Yeah, I get what you're saying because if the system in place is not in line with how you would make decisions, if you're not gut checking that, then
Right.
you're really missing an opportunity there, and that's not
Yeah.
creating efficiency. It's just creating missed opportunities for sure.
Yep.
I think when we were summarizing like what we've talked about in this bucket, it's like essentially like garbage in, garbage out. So like you do need to make sure that the information that you give it and then the review that you do is going to significantly impact how successful those are. So it'll definitely make your life easier if you're having that review and that oversight and it's in your voice and makes sense and is in line with the company's values and all that. So that's a big one, I think, for sure, that
Absolutely.
AI is really only as good as the human review and the inputs that you're giving it.
I want to transition to something that scares most companies, and that is candidates who are actively using AI during interviews. Now, data shows that 2/3 of job seekers use AI in the overall application process, but there's no real data on how many candidates are actively using AI during the interview. That's pretty elusive. It's hard. It's hard to track that, but I can tell you that it is a huge fear for a lot of hiring managers. Is this person getting in the moment help from AI? So I want to talk about how companies can avoid this and how they are helping candidates to be able to game their system.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And it seems like there's an opportunity to evaluate your interview process a little bit with this, right?
Yes. Yep. Because the first thing is that untrained hiring managers typically go to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever one they're using and says, here's our job description. Give me some interview questions. She's made a couple really great videos of here's what I put into ChatGPT. Here are the interview questions that it gave us and tell us what we found.
The questions leave a lot to be desired, right?
Yeah.
Like they're pretty generic. They're leading questions. They're hypothetical questions. So that is certainly not an effective way or a productive way at getting your interview questions. It feels quick. It feels really good, but those questions become super predictable and generic, and they're just not good. They won't help you to get the information you need from candidates to evaluate their answers. That's for sure.
That's right. Yeah. Those questions broke every rule that we train
Yeah.
our hiring managers to avoid, so we say no to the interview questions. Oftentimes AI is going to give you a very rigid script of what to follow. And it's harder for hiring managers to be able to ask good follow-up questions. And what they're going to get with these questions are are very canned answers. These are answers that candidates can Google and just give you a canned response back to. And that's not going to help you to differentiate between a high and a low performer. When you're asking cookie cutter questions,
Yep.
you're going to get cookie cutter responses.
And it's not going to help you too, like in knowing what follow-up questions to ask or how to redirect. It's going to give you that first step, but truly having the training, being well-intended going into it, AI is not going to be able to do that, as evident from the plugin of the job description. It's that AI can certainly suggest some questions, but they will not be the best. So best to avoid that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. What we do know is that a well-designed interview and interview process as a whole will make live AI irrelevant, because you'll know how to ask the right questions. You'll know how to dig into a candidate's experience and make it a specific interview to that person in your company. There's one more quick stat here that I found, because one thing we haven't touched on yet is AI interviewers having a candidate interview with an AI interviewer. And there's a stat here that I found that, so candidates are split. They have mixed feelings on AI interviews. Around 46% say yes and 46% say no on taking AI interviews. But some may appreciate AI for speed, feedback, and scheduling.
Yeah, well, this is where I've also seen our friend Mike break the interviewer, right? So he'll really he'll ask it to flip around and interview you. I think the reason we have some data on it, which is great, but I think it's still also so new and is still developing. I do understand the appeal for a company to use a screen, like for those initial screens, I can understand using an AI interviewer. But if you're not considering the impact or the people you might be losing that do not want to participate in that, I would be curious as a company to look at my drop-off rate. So once I have people apply and then one of those AI interviews gets set up, what's the drop-off rate of those? How many people fall out of the process? That would be a good indicator of what your process, if that is an effective piece of your process. It'll be based on the type of candidates, right? Where you're at, location-wise. Like there's a number of factors, but if you're not looking at that, that's a missed opportunity for sure. Because it might seem like an efficiency, but it actually might be more harmful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You have to be comfortable with spot checking every piece of that. And to your point, using data to make sure it's still actually working for you and not against you.
You can't just like set it and forget it with these AI tools. I think that's like the moral of the story as we're talking through this. It's like, you really can't. You do need to be a good steward of them. And it needs to be a partnership between AI and your interview process. It can't be a handoff. That's for sure.
That's a great point.
When you think about what companies should be asking themselves or what they should be reflecting on with AI integrating into their process, what are some of those things that come to mind for you?
If AI disappeared tomorrow, would this interview process still work? I think that's a solid question. Granted, it may not be as efficient if you don't have AI sending automatic feedback or setting scheduling, but overall, would the process still work?
Right.
If not, then it's the system breakdown. I think another question they could ask is, could I explain my hiring decision out loud to the candidate? I know from a screening standpoint, like we talked about before, it can't happen with the 400 to 4,000 people that initially applied. But as candidates continue to get further and further along in your process, you need to be good enough at your processes to be able to clearly state why this person aligns or doesn't align.
Yeah, for sure.
The most important question we have here is, am I using AI to save time, or am I using it to avoid learning how to actually interview? That's a hard question that people have to ask and kind of look themselves in the mirror, because most people are pretty proud of their hiring processes, whether they should be or shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important question to ask.
I am curious because we've been talking a lot about don'ts. Here's where it's harmful. But like, are there places that you think you'd recommend looking at or considering putting AI into your process? I think I know one of them if I had to guess, but I'm just curious, what would be your top kind of foolproof area that a company could easily maybe drop it in and it could really help?
For me, the top two are note-taking and scheduling.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. Well, note-taking, it used to be one of the hardest things that we would teach people.
It absolutely was. And now that there are so many great tools for note-taking during interviewing, that data alone helps companies to identify bottlenecks in their interviewing process. If they're noticing that 25% of people are withdrawing after the second interview, go back and review that data to see what happened in that interview. So it provides just such an important amount of information that companies can pull from to tweak and adjust and improve their interviewing processes.
Well, it's basically like having someone shadow your interviews all the time, which is what we used to do with our notebooks and jumping on the calls. And, you have a little co-pilot alongside. So I could totally see that one. Scheduling makes a ton of sense for sure too. So I do, there are many ways, but what I'm hearing is like that maybe, companies don't necessarily need more or better tools, right? Is that accurate to what you're thinking?
100%. They don't need more tools or better tools. They need interviewer training to make those tools work for them.
Or just interview process updates in general, right? We talked about if you're putting it over a broken process, it's really a waste of everyone's time. Interview training can definitely be a part of that for sure. Evaluating your interview process and saying, hey, would this still work with or without AI is a really great gut check for sure.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Well, we've talked so much today and I want to move into talking, our Dear Expert Interviewers segment. So we do this every week where we want to hear from you and you guys submit stories or you might submit feelings. We might grab them from our comments, DMs. If you have your own example or something you want to share with us, you can send it to hello@expertinterviewers.com. But I wanted to share a few opinions or quotes about AI from both sides, directly from some people that we interact with. So here's a couple that stood out to me. The candidate is where I'm going to start. A lot of times these can be negative. So just a warning, trigger warning. Okay. The first one that really stuck out to me was a comment from someone that said, so a robot decides if I can feed my family. That one hurts. That stings, right?
And it just goes to show how much candidates they just want to be well evaluated when it comes down to it. That one hurts. Something that companies need to hear.
Another one that stood out to me was, so we basically have to use Chat GPT to beat the ATS. This is one that comes up a lot in terms of are the AIs just battling each other, right? And that's a common feeling, maybe from both sides, the battle of the AI robots.
It's like feeling like it's leveling the playing field. Let's have these AI bots fight it out until we can get to the human and human interactions.
And the last one from the candidates is why is the AI a secret? Why do we have to be so secretive about using AI? And they want the companies to tell them when they're using it too. So that one really resonates with me in the sense of it does not need to be so secretive. We all know each other is doing it and using it. So let's just be transparent and upfront about it. Let's communicate around how and where. And if you as a company, if you have restrictions on where you want candidates to be using it or not, put that boundary in place, throughout your application process or wherever you need to insert it. I think there's a way to communicate, hey, here's where it's acceptable to use AI when interviewing with us, and here's where it's not. And that's not giving candidates the answers to the test. That's setting a boundary and saying, here's what's acceptable. So if you're worried about those people leveraging it during their live interviews, that's a great way to at least put a stop to it from the beginning.
Yes. Setting that boundary and making sure that they understand it's because we care about you. We want, if you get this job, we want you to like this job and to be able to do this job, because nothing worse than coming in and leaving 2 months later because you couldn't do it. So you can definitely phrase that in a way to show the benefit for the candidate as well.
Yeah. So here's from the flip side of that, right? What do employers, what do companies say as it relates to it, right? We literally can't review every resume. We're inundated, we're flooded, we're overwhelmed. And that's a combination of the job market where we're at and also the technology, right? Ramping up. So it's kind of that perfect storm, I would say. And I think that that's valid. I don't think that they're wrong for that. It is very difficult for a human to review every single resume. And we talked earlier about some possible solutions for that, right? Some spot checking and some ways to do that. But I feel that one. I can understand the pain.
And to the company's defense here is that there are AI tools now for candidates to push one click and to be automatically applying for 100 roles. I get that they're inundated with that amount of information. It's just, you have to have human spot checking. And same with candidates. If you're interviewing, if you push a button and it automatically applies for 150 positions, you better go through those and make sure that they actually align with what you want to do. And if not, wrangle that AI assistant in a little bit and say these aren't the exact jobs, and that'll save space in those recruiters folders as well.
Totally. Another one that stood out to me was AI isn't making the decision, right? AI is not hiring or firing anyone. I'm doing that. It's almost like a defensive. I feel like that's like a defensive statement. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure. Like, where are they
No.
saying that in the process? Like,
Yeah, I think they're trying to defend the fact that like we're using it throughout our process, but they're not making the AI is not making the decision. And what I think of when I hear that is like they're not making the final decision, but what impacts did your AI have leading up to that did influence the decision? Because like we said, you might be disregarding people that had you done a spot check or had you checked in would have still gotten through. So I wonder, does your final candidate pool actually reflect the best possible talent or does it not? Right.
right.
And that would make the impact of the decision actually part of AI or inclusive of AI.
Yes.
So it's just interesting.
Yeah. It is interesting. Companies have to be brave enough to pull back the curtain and really review their processes. And
Yeah.
that's scary for some.
What we're saying is like AI isn't the villain,
Right.
but it's certainly not the hero, right? That everybody wants it to be or makes it out to be. So it's a tool, and that tool is going to amplify whatever systems you have in place, right?
If your processes are strong, AI is going to help that. If it's super messy and chaotic and biased, AI is going to make that messier faster.
Totally. Yeah. So structure is going to beat your tools every time.
Absolutely.
It's going to dunk on them.
Well, thanks for listening this week. And we're just going to leave you with don't be that interviewer.
Yeah. Always and forever.